It seems like history was written a long time ago, but why do the same questions keep coming up again and again? Why do textbooks make everything seem so straightforward? But in excavations, documents, and myths, there are gaps. Some civilizations disappear without a trace, while others seem to come out of nowhere. Sometimes it even seems like someone deliberately erased or hid the traces. These 20 mysteries changed my perspective on everything I thought I knew about the past. Hi friend, you're on the Kurtop channel. The disappearance of Atlantis. Atlantis is not just an ancient legend, it's a cultural phantom that still influences minds, dreams, and even science. Plato described it with amazing detail. A huge island with a highly developed civilization, a powerful army, and a complex system of canals. He claimed that Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, opposite the Atlas Mountains, and sank underwater as a result of a massive earthquake in just one day. Around 9,500 BC, more than 11,000 years, have passed since then, and we are still debating whether it ever existed. It has been searched for in Crete and Santorini, in Cuba and Brazil, in Iceland, and at the bottom of the Atlantic. Scientists have proposed hundreds of theories, from the disaster on Thera to a distorted memory of a sunken part of the Sahara. The problem is that we don't have a single direct piece of archaeological evidence. No artifacts, no remains, no genetic trace. But science also can't completely disprove the existence of Atlantis. The strangest thing is the scale of its influence. The legend of Atlantis gave rise to entire schools of philosophy. Occult theories, Nazi mystics, pseudoscience, conspiracy theorists, and science fiction writers all drew on it. Atlantis became a symbol of a lost golden age. It fascinates us because it's not just a vanished land. It's the idea that once we were more than we are now. Sometimes I think that Atlantis is not a sunken island, but a reflection of our dream. We want to believe that once people were stronger, smarter, better. And until we learn the truth, this story will keep resurfacing again and again. The Great Flood, myth or catastrophe? The story of the Great Flood is one of the most universal stories in world culture. It is known not only from the Bible, where Noah builds the ark, but also from the Sumerian epic about Ziusudra, the Babylonian story of Utnapishtim, the Indian myth of Manu, the Greek tale of Deucalion, Chinese chronicles, legends of Native Americans, and even Arctic tales. It's almost impossible to dismiss such a coincidence as accidental. It makes you wonder, maybe the flood of Deucalion really happened? And if so, when? One of the most convincing hypotheses speaks of an event that happened about 7,600 years ago. At that time, a sharp rise in global sea level sent salty water through the Bosporus into the Black Sea basin. Geologists claim that the water level rose by 140 meters, flooding vast areas. What used to be fertile land became sea. This event really could have seemed like the end of the world for people of that era. But was it a global flood? Probably not. However, for the sake of clarity, for specific people living in river valleys, lowlands, and near the coast, this was a global catastrophe. Imagine, the water takes everything. Your home, livestock, land, village, ancestors. People escape on rafts. They go into the mountains. Centuries later, the memory of what happened turns into a myth, universal and terrifying. I am amazed at how this ancient fear still lives within us. Even in the 21st century, we are afraid of floods. We talk about climate catastrophe as if we genetically remember how the world once truly drowned. And maybe that's not true, just a myth. It's a warning. Who built the pyramids? They have been standing for more than 4,500 years. Hundreds of tons of stone, millions of blocks, perfectly measured angles. The majestic, almost alien pyramids of Giza still remain a symbol of eternity and mystery. But the main question is simple. How? Modern archaeology offers different theories. According to one of them, the blocks were quarried, delivered to the construction site using sledges and wet sand. Another theory suggests the blocks were made on site from limestone and clay, essentially ancient concrete. French engineer Joseph Davidovits even presented his own formula for geopolymer stone. And still, even considering these hypotheses, we don't have a definitive answer. It's not just about the technology. The mystery lies in the scale. To build the Pyramid of Khufu, it would have taken about 2.3 million blocks. Even with perfect labor organization, that's decades of work and thousands of workers. And let's remember, this was the ancient world. No wheeled cranes and no screens, no steel, no electricity. And yet the internal shafts are aligned with centimeter precision, and the orientation of the pyramid's sides almost perfectly matches the 4 cardinal directions. And there are other questions. Why were such tombs needed? Why are all 3 pyramids of Giza aligned at the same angles as the stars of Orion's belt? Why do some blocks show traces of processing that look more like melting than cutting? The more I read about the pyramids, the more I feel this is not just a structure, it's a message. They were built not only for the dead, they were built for the future, for us. And until we understand exactly how they were built, we won't understand why. The mystery of Stonehenge. Stonehenge is like a puzzle made of stone. It has stood on the Salisbury Plain for more than 4,000 years. The giant stones are arranged in a circle with inner and outer rings. Some of them weigh up to 25 tons. Some were brought from hundreds of kilometers away. How? Why? Who did this? Scientists are still debating. Some say that it is simply a Druid sanctuary. Others believe that the complex was built long before the Celts appeared, about 1,000 years earlier. There is also a theory that it was an ancient observatory. After all, certain stones are indeed aligned with the solstices. But even if that's true, why was such a large scale necessary? The problem is that we have almost no written sources from that time. We can only guess. But one thing is truly impressive: the engineering precision. The stones stood upright. They were capped with horizontal blocks, creating portals. This requires not only strength, but also knowledge. And after all, this wasn't a developed city, but essentially a field, without metal, without blueprints, without machinery. What's even stranger is that in the 20th century, Stonehenge was reconstructed. Some stones were put back in place using cranes. It turns out that we still aren't sure which stones were in their original places and which ones had already been moved. This adds even more confusion to an already complicated history. Giants, Easter Island. Easter Island is a tiny patch of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but that's where hundreds of stone giants called Moai stand. Their faces are turned inward toward the island, as if they are guarding it. The largest ones reach up to 10 meters in height and weigh up to 80 tons. And most importantly, no one knows for sure how they were made or why. It is believed that the Moai were carved by the local Rapa Nui people around the 11th to 16th centuries. They used stone axes, wooden levers, and ropes. Some scientists tried to recreate this process, and they even succeeded, but only with relatively small statues. What about those that weighed dozens of tons? How were they moved across the island, considering that there are no trees on Easter Island for sturdy logs? Thor Heyerdahl suggested that the statues were dragged while lying down. Another theory says they were rocked from side to side, like a refrigerator on ropes. But even here, questions remain, especially about how the statues were fitted with pukao hats, which weigh up to 2 tons and are placed on top. Lifting them without cranes is almost impossible. There's another question too. Why? Some think these were portraits of ancestors, while others believe the Moai represented clan power. However, the island was small, with few resources. Why did the entire population spend their energy on these stone heads? A lonely island without trees, without iron, with mysterious statues that seem to watch you. I can't shake the thought that this was a ritual not for people, but for someone who was supposed to see these statues from the sky or from the sea. Did the Maya disappear? The Maya left behind incredible things: cities carved out in the jungle, temples resembling stepped pyramids, a complex writing system, and extremely precise astronomical calculations. Their calendars were so accurate that they still spark debates today. But by the time the Spanish arrived, only small settlements in the forests remained of the great civilization. No army, no power, no temples. What happened? Scientists have proposed dozens of theories. The most common theory is an environmental disaster. The Maya cut down too many forests, the soil became depleted, and a drought began. Combined with overpopulation and internal conflicts, this could have led to collapse. There is also a theory about epidemics. Some say there were wars among rival cities and states. Even an alien influence is mentioned in conspiracy circles. The disappearance of an entire culture seems that strange. But what is especially important is that the Maya did not disappear completely. The descendants of this civilization still live in Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize. They speak Mayan languages. They preserve traditions, customs, and costumes. It's just that the political structure we call the Maya civilization collapsed. And it collapsed suddenly. The cities were abandoned, the power disappeared. The writing system was forgotten over time. When you look at their stone cities covered in moss, you get the feeling that all this happened quite recently, as if they just went deeper into the jungle and will come back someday. Not as a tribe, but as a culture with something to say to the world once again. Who were the Sumerians? We are used to thinking that history begins with Egypt, but if we look deeper, it turns out that the first great civilization was not the Egyptians, but the Sumerians. They were the ones who built the first cities, created the first writing system, made complex calculations. They studied astronomy, medicine, and irrigation, and even created laws. It's as if they were from another time, but who they were still remains a mystery. The Sumerians appeared in southern Mesopotamia around the 4th millennium BC and immediately as a highly organized society. There are no traces of their gradual development. It's as if they arrived with advanced knowledge. Their complex language is unlike any other, with no found links to world languages. This raises the question, where did they come from? There is a theory that the Sumerians came from the east, possibly from the mountainous regions of Iran or Pakistan. In their language, the words for country and mountain are the same. This could be a hint, but there are also more exotic theories. For example, claims that the Sumerians brought their knowledge from a sunken continent or had contact with extraterrestrials. Of course, there is still no evidence for these oddities. What surprises me personally is the amount of knowledge they possessed. They didn't just build houses, they knew how to reinforce the foundation. They didn't just write, they kept accounting records. They didn't just observe the stars. They predicted lunar eclipses. They were rational, civilized, and yet they disappeared. At some point, the Sumerians dissolved into other peoples. Their language vanished, and all that remains are cuneiform tablets and scattered guesses. Where did the Neanderthals go? They lived in Europe and Asia long before us. Strong, resilient, well adapted to the cold. We're used to thinking of Neanderthals as some kind of dim-witted cavemen, but that's not the case at all. They had a larger brain volume than we do. They made tools, used fire, buried their dead, and cared for the wounded. There is evidence that they played primitive flutes and decorated themselves with shells. Neanderthals were not beasts. They were a fully developed human species, almost like us. 40,000 years ago, they disappeared, and it's still unclear why. There are three main theories. Assimilation. They interbred with Cro-Magnons, and now part of their genes lives in us. Genocide. Our ancestors wiped them out in the struggle for resources. And climate. A sharp cooling began, which Neanderthals couldn't handle, because they didn't make clothes or build shelters. Most likely it was all of these at once. Some died, some disappeared into us. To this day, our genome contains 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, especially in Europeans and Asians. But what does that mean? Memory or oblivion? There's one thing in this story that touches me. They were almost like us, but something kept them from surviving. The forgotten rulers of Egypt. Most of us think of Egypt as an eternal civilization, strong, proud, independent. But there was a time when it was ruled by outsiders. They were called the Hyksos. This word means rulers of foreign lands or shepherd kings. Who they really were is still a matter of debate. The Hyksos invaded Egypt around the 17th century BC, and they didn't just destroy the country. They took it over. They founded a dynasty. They ruled for almost a century. They introduced new technologies. It is believed that they were the ones who brought the war chariot to Egypt. This changed the entire strategy of warfare in the Middle East. There is also evidence that the Hyksos were the first to actively use bronze and composite weapons in Egyptian territory. Where did they come from? It's a mystery. Some believe they came from Canaan, which is modern-day Levant. Others think they were nomadic tribes from Asia. Some researchers suggest that the Hyksos were a mix of different peoples, traders, warriors, herders, who united during a wave of migration and wars. But their culture has not survived in its pure form. We know about them mainly from Egyptian sources, which means with a strong sense of hostility. After the expulsion of the Hyksos, the Egyptians began a new era, the 18th dynasty, the very same one in which Tutankhamun lived. Perhaps it was hatred. Hatred for their oppressors helped Egypt regain power, yet some Hyksos achievements were kept and became part of Egyptian tradition. Moments like this always catch my attention. When the victors don't just forget the defeated, but also take the very best of them. Where did the Scythians go? The Scythians are one of those peoples that everyone seems to have heard of, but almost no one knows much about. The Greeks described them as wild horsemen from the north. They lived without cities, but mastered the art of war. The 18th century devoted an entire section of its works to them. And then, silence. At some point, the Scythians simply disappear from history. At the height of their power, they controlled vast territories, from the Danube to the Altai. They traded with the Greeks, fought with the Persians, and battled Alexander the Great. Later, they clashed with the Sarmatians and the Huns. Their culture was vibrant and unique. Barrows, golden ornaments, animal style in art, a special attitude toward death, and then suddenly, a break. No chronicles, no clear evidence of what happened to them. Historians suggest that the Scythians merged with other peoples. Some say with the Sarmatians, others with the Slavs, or the peoples of the Caucasus. Some believe that the descendants of the Scythians could be the Ossetians, Chechens, or Ingush. But all of this is just hypotheses. There is no direct evidence. What especially fascinates me are their barrows. You stand on a step hill where thousands of years ago a chief was buried below you with weapons, gold, and a horse. Everything is carefully arranged, as if the person didn't die, but simply set out on a long journey. And then you look at this and realize it wasn't just an army or a people that disappeared. An entire worldview vanished, powerful, swift, nomadic, with its own logic and its own truth. The disappearance of the 10 tribes of Israel is one of the most mysterious and least discussed topics in history. At the end of the 8th century BC, almost the entire ancient Israelite state disappeared. The Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. Along with them, 10 of the 12 tribes vanished, essentially 5/6 of the population. Historical chronicles report after the conquest, the Assyrians forcibly relocated the Israelites to Mesopotamia, to the regions of present-day Iran and Afghanistan. After that, their trail disappears. The people vanished from the historical map. More than 2,000 years have passed. During this time, they became a myth. People search for them worldwide, in India, Iraq, and the Caucasus. In Japan, there is even a movement called Makuya, whose followers are convinced that the Japanese imperial family has Jewish origins. The word Mikado itself, in their opinion, comes from Migadol, meaning great. Some see the Afghan Pashtuns as descendants of the Israelites. Others see them in the Native Americans of North America. But none of these theories has gained acceptance. There is no definite genetic connection. There is no written evidence. There is no archaeological trace. There is only a legend and the desire to find those who once left and never returned. Who discovered America before Columbus? When we hear about the discovery of America, we almost automatically remember the year 1492 and Columbus's ships. But more and more often, there are arguments that Europeans visited the New World long before him, especially the Vikings. The main character of this alternative history is Bjarni Herjolfsson, a Scandinavian merchant. At the end of the 10th century, he was blown off course by a storm, and, according to him, he saw Greenland to the west. He didn't land there, but he told others about it. A few years later, Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, set out to search and found Vinland. This is believed to have been part of the Canadian coast. In 1960 in Lonso Meadows, Newfoundland, the remains of a Norse settlement were found. Houses, a smithy, nails. The evidence is clear. But for a long time, official history ignored this data. Why? Perhaps because it's more convenient when a discovery is tied to a single date and a single hero, rather than a sailor's mistake in an abandoned village. But the mysteries don't end there. There is a theory that even before the Vikings, Phoenicians, Basques, Celts, and Chinese visited the American coast. However, the evidence is highly questionable. Only the Viking account is firmly established. But even it is still seen as something secondary, like, yes, they were there, but it didn't matter. Where was the cradle of the Indo-Europeans? We speak Indo-European languages. Most languages of Europe, Iran, and India are part of one huge family. They have a common root. But where did it come from? Where was that very starting point? the cradle from which the ancestors of the Slavs, Celts, Greeks, Indians, and Germans later spread. For a long time, it was believed that everything began in India. That's where the term Indo-European comes from. But later, scientists realized that there are too few language branches in India. But in the steppes of Eastern Europe, on the contrary, there was linguistic diversity. This is called the center of gravity principle. The closer you get to the source, the more variations appear. Today, the steppe hypothesis is one of the most recognized theories. According to it, the Indo-Europeans appeared about 4,500 years ago in the south of Russia and Ukraine, in the area of the Yamnaya culture. They knew how to domesticate horses, used wagons, and worked with metal. They spread west into Europe and east into Asia, bringing with them not only words, but also culture, technology, and customs. And yet, despite archaeology, linguistics, and genetics, we don't have a single answer. There's the Anatolian hypothesis, which says the homeland was in Asia Minor. There's the Iran theory. There's even an idea that it all started in the Balkans. What strikes me about this topic is how easily we lose the threads of origin.
Мы знаем, откуда пришел iPhone, но не...
Where did the word mother come from? We can describe the process of 19th century colonization in detail, but we can't say for sure where the words spoken by billions of people today actually came from. Maybe the question isn't exactly where this cradle was, but why we lost it, and why we're still trying to find ourselves in language. What caused the great migration of peoples? 4th, 5th centuries AD. The map of Europe begins to crack at the seams. Waves of migrants descend upon the Roman Empire, Visigoths, Huns, Vandals, religious sects. The great empire, which had maintained order for centuries, is collapsing before our very eyes. What will later be called the Middle Ages begins, and with it, the Age of Darkness. What triggered such a movement of peoples? The official version is a combination of factors: climate cooling, crop failures, and population growth, internal conflicts. New tribes were searching for land, resources, and safety. But why did it all happen at the same time across all of Eurasia? Why did the Germanic peoples, the Slavs, and the steppe nomads all start moving? What was the trigger? There is a theory that it all started with the Huns, a warlike people from Central Asia, who, like a chain reaction, pushed other tribes to the west. Other researchers believe that the reasons go deeper. It is possible that an ecological disaster was happening in Asia, which forced entire cultures to leave their homelands. There's even a suggestion that changes in the Earth's magnetic field could have influenced them, and people started to move. The Romans could not withstand the pressure. Their roads, walls, and legions could not stop those who came not so much to fight, but to survive. The empire disappeared. In its place, another Europe arose, feudal, religious, fragmented. But without this migration, there would be no France, Germany, or Russia. We literally live on the ruins of Rome and on the bones of that ancient storm.
Чума и ее маршрут.
The 14th century. Europe is frozen in terror. The Black Death spreads astonishingly through cities and villages. People die by the thousands. Doctors put on beaked masks. Families disappear within a few days. And most importantly, no one understands what's happening. Today we know it was the plague, but even with modern knowledge, questions remain. Why did it strike almost exactly along the same routes as the plague of Justinian 1,000 years earlier? Why did outbreaks occur almost simultaneously in London, Moscow, and Paris? How could the plague spread so quickly, given that travel speed in the Middle Ages was extremely slow? The usual culprit is said to be the black rat's flea. It carried the Yersinia pestis bacterium, but the range of wild rats did not cover all of northern Europe. Most importantly, these rodents theoretically couldn't have appeared in dozens of cities at once. Some scientists even believe that it wasn't about the rats at all, but about the air, changes in climate, humidity, or waves of dust that could have carried the infection. There is also a theory that the disease spread faster.
Из-за биологии, а из-за психологии.
Through panic, mass exodus, and flight. Infected people moved to new places without even knowing they were carrying death with them. As a result, the epidemic behaved not like a wave, but like a network. It ignited in many places at once like sparks on dry grass. What scares me in this story is not so much the disease itself, but how it repeats itself. We think that everything has changed since then: medicine, hygiene, science. But pandemics still outpace common sense. Maybe it's not just about microbes. Maybe it's a mirror of society. The more connections there are, the more vulnerable the system becomes. And every time we start to forget, something comes along to remind us again. The past is closer than it seems.
Король Артур – миф на троне.
He has been written about since the 12th century. There are movies about him, novels, and comics. King Arthur is an almost mythological figure. The Round Table, the Sword in the Stone, Merlin, Camelot. But behind all these legends, the main question remains, was he real? Historians still argue about it. Some believe that Arthur is a composite figure, a leader of the Celtic resistance against the Anglo-Saxons, about whom a heroic episode was composed centuries later. Others are convinced that he is a completely fictional character, a literary construct. The problem is that sources about him appear too late. The first mentions appear 300 to 400 years after the supposed era of his life. There are theories that the prototype for Arthur was a Roman military leader who stayed in Britain after the legions left. Some point to a possible connection with a leader named Ambrosius Aurelianus, but there is no direct evidence, no grave, no chronicles, no reliable descriptions from contemporaries. What's interesting is something else. In the legends about Arthur, almost everything is about morals, about duty, honor, truth, and the fight for justice. He is not just a king. He is the idea of what a king should be. Perhaps that's why the image of Arthur is so enduring, because it's not about a specific person, but about what we all lack. The death of Alexander. Alexander the Great conquered half the world by the age of 30. His army marched from Greece to India. He never lost a single battle. He destroyed empires and created new ones. But in 323 BC, at the height of his power, he suddenly dies in Babylon. He is only 32 years old. What happened? There are many theories. The Persians said it was punishment for desecrating the tomb of King Cyrus. The Macedonians believed he simply wore himself out. Drinking, illnesses, exhaustion. Roman historians thought he was poisoned. There is a theory that it was malaria or West Nile fever, or an autoimmune disease, or a slow-acting poison brought from the East. Some questions are raised not by the cause of death, but by what happened afterward. Where is his body? According to one version, the sarcophagus was taken to Egypt. According to another, it never made it there. After that, the trail is lost. No tomb, no inscription, no official burial. For the ancient world, this is almost an impossible absurdity. A person like that should have been deified, but instead, there is only silence. Some suggest that the body was deliberately hidden to prevent the rise of a cult, to avoid giving legitimacy to his heirs, or because his death was part of a conspiracy to erase all traces. Sometimes the most terrifying secret is not how a person lived, but how he left this world. What remained of Alexander was glory, cities bearing his name, and a myth. But there is no grave, no cross, no mausoleum, only speculation. And that makes his death even more legendary and unsettling. The Tsar's gold. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Russian Empire possessed the largest gold reserve in the world, over 1,300 tons, in bars, coins, state vaults, and the imperial treasury. Everything vanished, literally. The Romanovs' gold disappeared without a trace. What happened to that gold? Some believe part of the treasure went to Kolchak, admiral of the White Army. He transported the gold in trains across Siberia to use it in the fight against the Bolsheviks. But then complete confusion begins. One train was blocked by the Reds, another halted by the Japanese, a third looted by the Czechoslovaks, and it's unclear if a fourth existed. Some amounts ended up in banks in Japan, China, and France, but not all of it. A huge part, hundreds of tons, disappeared. One version says the gold was hidden in the Siberian mountains and remains in the taiga. Another claims it was taken through Vladivostok and secretly sold abroad. According to a third version, the gold simply disappeared in the chaos of the Civil War. Some of it vanished in shadowy operations. Interestingly, since then, new information keeps appearing in Russia. Sometimes someone finds a map. Sometimes there are eyewitness accounts, or supposedly a stash has been discovered. But there is no official confirmation of any of it. The Tsar's gold has turned into a national mystery. I'm amazed at how billions can just disappear, literally without a trace, and not in ancient times, but just 100 years ago. We know who sat on the throne, what he ate for breakfast, what decrees he signed, but we don't know where the metal that supported the empire is hidden. The treasures of the Templars. The Templars were not just knights, they were a financial empire of the Middle Ages. They had castles, ships, a treasury, their own banks, and even their own transfer system. The French king, Philip IV, owed them a huge sum, and then suddenly he declares the order illegal. They are arrested, tried, tortured, and most importantly, their treasures disappear. Officially, when the Paris headquarters of the Templars was seized, nothing valuable was found. No gold, no artifacts, no documents. The treasury was empty. This caused panic and a lot of rumors. How could this be? Where is everything? It was said that a few hours before the raid, a caravan left Paris delivering the gold to the port of La Rochelle. From there, it was taken by ships in an unknown direction. Since then, one of the most persistent historical quests has begun, to find the Templar gold. Many believe it's in Scotland, others think it's on Oak Island in Canada, where a clever hidden vault with traps was supposedly built. Some believe that the treasure was transported to Switzerland and became the foundation of the future banking system. There's even a theory that the gold was hidden in Jerusalem and is still being guarded to this day. The fact is, we don't even know the approximate amount that was lost. Considering the scale of the order, it could have been thousands of kilograms of gold, relics, documents, and political secrets. All of it disappeared in an instant.
Следов нет. Лично
This is a story about treasures. It's a story about a power that became too independent and was destroyed. And the gold disappeared along with its influence. And maybe it still works, just in different hands now. Who paid for the revolution? 1917. The Russian Empire collapses. Power passes to the Bolsheviks. Lenin, Trotsky, new slogans, new rules. Everything seems spontaneous. The will of the people, the uprising of the masses. But one question still remains unanswered. Who paid for it? Officially, it is believed that the Bolsheviks were financed through party dues, donations, and help from sympathizers. But this does not explain the scale. Publishing newspapers, renting buildings, weapons, logistics, transporting leaders, security, all of this requires money. A lot of money. Where did it come from? There is a theory about funding from Germany. Supposedly, the Kaiser's general staff wanted to destabilize Russia and thus take it out of the war. Allegedly, money was given to Lenin. A sealed train car from Switzerland was arranged and his safety was ensured. This is confirmed by many indirect sources, but there are no direct documents, or they were destroyed. Another theory speaks of the West. Bankers, Wall Street, the English, the Old Believers, they say the revolution was beneficial to those who wanted to destroy the old order and invest in a new controlled chaos. There are even names, Jacob Schiff, Olaf Ashberg, Morgenthau, but again, there is little evidence. Everything breaks down into hints and coincidences. The strangest thing is that 100 years later, we still can't say for sure how one of the largest political transformations was financed. We know who marched in the streets, who seized the palaces, but we don't know who printed the leaflets and paid for the trains. Maybe revolution is not only a battle of ideas, but also invisible money, and those who know how to bet on the future. I don't know which of these mysteries is the most important, but I do know one thing. The real history is not the one in the textbooks. It breaks through from fragments, from random discoveries, and strange coincidences. And maybe we won't find all the answers, but if we at least start asking the right questions, that will already change something. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, everyone.